This is every team in the Western Conference ranked into their tiers of title contention, even though it's way too early ahead of the 2026 NBA season. And kicking things off with the very first of my 6 tiers, we've got what I'm calling the fading for first tier. This one's reserved for one single team, the Utah Jazz. Now look, tanking is still the top priority in Utah. The Jazz simply don't have enough pieces yet to start seriously thinking about competing. Yes, they did land Ace Bailey with the 5th overall pick, and that's a promising step forward, but this season is really going to be about giving him reps and figuring out exactly what kind of player he can be at the NBA level. But even though Ace wasn't pleased with Utah drafting him, the Jazz simply had to do it. Nobody can argue with his ceiling. At 6'9" and one of the best shooters in the draft, Bailey has as much potential as anybody else in the field. In the end, this is shaping up to be another year where Utah leans into the fade, aiming for a top lottery pick to continue to build this young core through the draft. Now we enter tier 5, which I'm calling on the outside looking in. And here we have the Kings, Pelicans, Suns, and Trailblazers. Out of all of these teams, Portland definitely stands as the outlier, because while they're still a few pieces away from legitimately competing, I actually really like what they're building. They've got a young talented core coming through, and for once, there's a genuine sense of direction in what the franchise is trying to become. It's early days, sure, but at least it feels like they know where they're heading. For the rest of these teams though, they're either falling apart at the seams or randomly throwing pieces together and hoping it magically turns into a playoff team. Let's start with the Pelicans, because I honestly have no clue what that organization is trying to accomplish. Draft night only made that more obvious, trading up to take Derek Queen 13th overall, and in return, they had to give up an unprotected 2026 Milwaukee Bucks first rounder in the process. That is a hugely valuable pick, and they used it on a player who plays a position they already have filled. Maybe Queen turns out to be great, who knows? But the confusion doesn't even stop there. Their entire roster just feels like a weird mismatch of players that don't really complement each other. They're clearly not trying to tank, given they traded for DeJounte Murray and still have Zion. But in my estimation, they're also nowhere near good enough to be anything more than a play-in team in the West. And honestly, with how tough the West is, I'm not even sure they're going to get that far. There's just too many unanswered questions in New Orleans. And I don't think we're going to get too many answers this season, as I expect them to be pretty underwhelming yet again. And then you've got the Kings and the Suns, who are kind of in the same boat, just piecing together whatever random talent they can find, and then sitting back with their fingers crossed, hoping that something clicks. But for me, out of this whole group, Portland feels the most stable. They've got a direction, a plan, and some exciting young players coming through, which is a lot more than I can say for the other 3 right now. Alright, now we enter tier 4, and from this point on, we're only talking about teams that I genuinely believe have enough to make some serious noise. This tier is called the Almost Contenders, which includes the Los Angeles Lakers, Mavericks, Grizzlies, and Spurs. Let's start off with LA, who just made a pretty bold move by signing DeAndre Ayton to fill out that final spot in their starting 5. Now, Ayton might not be an elite big in today's NBA, but there's still a real pathway forward for him to become a high-impact player if, and this is a big if, he fully buys into his role. And that is where the questions do start, because his mentality and work ethic have been a knock on him all throughout his career so far. It's why the Suns eventually dealt him, and probably why Portland didn't think twice about letting him go either. But when you break down his physical tools, it's all there. He's 7'1", strong, mobile, and has one of the more smoothest mid-range games from any big you're going to see, while also being an athletic lob threat as well. It just hasn't fully clicked for him. That being said, he is now on a team with 2 of the best playmakers we've ever seen in LeBron James and Luka Doncic, and that could be exactly exactly what he needs, considering he's on a team-friendly deal, just over $16 million for 2 seasons, and this move is a low-risk one with some real upside. If it works, great, but if not, the Lakers haven't shot themselves in the foot because they still have the flexibility to go out there and find another center without locking themselves into a long-term situation. Now, speaking of Luka, I fully expect him to come out next season with a serious point to prove. Last year was a wild ride for him. The injuries he dealt with, along with being the headline of one of the most shocking trades you're ever going to see, as that whole season just felt like a fever dream. But I've got a very strong feeling we're in for a revenge season next year, an MVP level run, and I think he's going to remind everybody exactly who he is, and that is going to be the biggest strength of this Lakers team. But even with all that offensive firepower, I still think there's a gaping hole on the defensive end. Losing Dorian Finney-Smith to Houston at the beginning of free agency was a big hit, especially considering how he was one of the better defenders on the whole roster. So while I expect the offense to be electric, maybe one of the best in the league, the defense still has some serious holes that need patching. Whether that's going to come with a couple of smart moves in the coming weeks, potentially a low-cost free agent pickup, or even a mid-season trade, it's something I think they're going to have to address if they want to be anything more than just a fun playoff team. Now we've got the Mavericks, and honestly, they only find themselves in this position because of some outrageous luck, landing the #1 overall pick despite having just a 1% chance. But they made the most of it, drafting Cooper Flagg, and I think his impact is going to be felt pretty much immediately. He already looks like one of those rare guys who's NBA ready from the jump, with the physicality, skill set, and motor to really impact the game on both sides of the ball. Jason Kidd plans to test him out at point guard, which might look a little clunky earlier in the season, but I think it's going to pay off in a big way, especially once Kyrie Irving returns to the lineup sometime in January or February. Until then, the Mavericks went out and added D'Angelo Russell on a team-friendly deal to help them carry some of that playmaking load. It's still unclear whether D'Lo starts or comes off the bench, but either way, he's going to be important in bridging that gap until Kyrie comes back. But where I think Dallas really shines is going to be on the defensive end. The interior presence they've built is borderline ridiculous, with Anthony Davis, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, and now Cooper Flagg all patrolling the paint. Trying to score inside against this team is genuinely going to be a nightmare. But the real question is going to be whether or not they can generate enough offense before Kyrie returns, and just how ready Cooper Flagg is to handle a real playoff level role. Those are the things that's holding this team back from climbing any higher than tier 4 for right now. Now, let's look at the Memphis Grizzlies. Memphis seems to be in this weird holding pattern, trying to just tread water rather than really push forward. They traded away Desmond Bane to Orlando and brought in Cole Anthony and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, while also signing Ty Jerome in free agency. For me though, none of those moves are really going to move the needle. And just today, they made another underwhelming deal. In one trade, sending Jay Huff to Indiana and then bringing in Jock Landale from Houston. It's all very average. I think it's going to be another season where they look solid for stretches, especially when Ja Morant is healthy, but it's just going to be hard to trust this team to stay on the floor. Injuries have always been relentless, and the recent Jaren Jackson Jr. situation sums it all up perfectly. The guy signs a supermax, and literally the next day ends up with a turf toe injury. That's just how things are going in Memphis right now, and in a Western Conference this deep, I just don't think they have the consistency, the depth, or the health to be a real threat. And finally, the final team in Tier 4, we have the San Antonio Spurs, who to me are the most exciting team in this tier, and probably the best positioned for the long haul. Wemby is heading into year 3, and typically that's when we see the big leap. I think he's going to be in the MVP conversation next season, and I don't really have any doubts about that opinion. On top of that, they just traded for De'Aaron Fox, they have the reigning Rookie of the Year, Stephon Castle, and just added 2 more huge prospects in the draft, in Carter Bryant and Dylan Harper. This team is absolutely loaded with young talent, talent, and in my opinion, is going to be absolute cinema to watch next season. But even with all of that, I still can't quite put them any higher than tier 4 just yet. There are going to be bumps early going next season. They've got to figure out what kind of team they want to be, and that is going to take some time. One of these early season bumps they'll have to go through could be the point guard situation. Fox was acquired at the trade deadline, and now they just drafted Dylan Harper with the 2nd overall pick. Another point guard with massive upside. If Harper plays well enough to force his way into the starting 5, that could create a bit of a dilemma. I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing Fox trade rumors in the coming years, especially if Harper develops really quickly. But it's also going to be on Fox to prove that he is indispensable. If he can build some real chemistry with Wemby, especially in pick and roll action, that might be the key to his long-term fit. They weren't able to get a ton of reps together last season, but I expect a heavy dose of those two working together early on in the season. If it all clicks, that duo could become the offensive backbone of this team for years to come. But if not, the door is going to be wide open for Dylan Harper to jump in and take that role. So yeah, there's a lot to be excited about in San Antonio. It just might take a little bit of time for it all to come together. Alright, now let's move on to tier 3, the dark horses with a map. And this is where we find the Golden State Warriors and the Los Angeles Clippers. Both of these teams sit in that dangerous zone where if things break their way, mainly in terms of health, they could very easily turn into absolute nightmares in the postseason. They aren't quite favorites, but they know the terrain. They've got the experience, and if they can just stay on the floor, they have the kind of star power and defensive identity that to me makes them really scary. Let's start off with Golden State, because honestly, I don't think people fully appreciate just how great they actually were last season. They only bowed out in the 2nd round because of a Game 1 injury to Steph Curry. And even with that, the series against Minnesota was still really close. The Wolves were very clunky offensively, and a lot of that credit has to go to just how good the Golden State defense was, and I truly believe that if Steph had been healthy, the Warriors would have been in the conference finals. And once you're there, who really knows? They matched up well against Oklahoma City in the regular season, and considering just how good Golden State's defense was at that point, I think they could have made life really difficult for a Thunder team that often has real struggles with their offense. I truly believe that that series could have been up in the air. That's how close they were to making another real championship run. And with just a few tweaks, I think they can be right back in the mix heading into 2026. Now, as things currently stand, Golden State do have to make a couple more moves before I feel comfortable moving them up to tier 2. They lost Kevon Looney, and there's still been plenty of trade rumors surrounding Jonathan Kuminga, with talk of a possible sign and trade deal that could bring back some more strong role players. I think they'd benefit massively from adding a sizable 3-and-D type wing who can hold up defensively, especially since the team felt a little undersized at the guard spots last year. A veteran presence like Al Horford could also be an underrated pickup. Someone who can knock down the 3-ball, give them solid bench minutes, and can provide 5-out spacing, something the Warriors haven't really experimented with before. But we're going to have to wait and see how the rest of this offseason plays out before making any more bold predictions. But we do know this: Golden State still have Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, two of the most cold-blooded closers in the game. Butler fit with this team like a glove last year and shored up so many of their previous weaknesses. With just a couple more key additions, I really like what Golden State could be heading into this season. Now, let's talk about the Clippers. Yeah, they were a first-round exit last season, but honestly, it might have been one of the more impressive first-round exits you're going to see. The expectations for this team was really low heading into the year, and they still managed to put together a really strong regular season, especially on the defensive end. Then, once Kawhi Leonard returned to the lineup, the offense took a major leap as well. So by the back half of the regular season, they had turned themselves into one of the more well-balanced teams in the league. The first round series against Denver went the distance, and sure, they got blown out in 7, but overall, it was a battle through and through, and they proved to everybody that they were right in that series. Then, the recent free agent addition of Brook Lopez was a really smart move. Now, they they're going to have 48 minutes of quality center play, and in certain bench units, Lopez can give them the flexibility to space the floor without giving up too much on the other end. I genuinely believe that if the Clippers had Brook Lopez in that Denver series, I think they could have won that series. Ivica Zubac was fantastic last season as well. Definitely the best season of his career. And if he takes even a tiny step forward, that front court duo is going to be a real weapon. He was dominant in the paint, pulled down every rebound in sight, and gave them timely scoring when they needed it. And then you've still got the core of James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, both of whom looked great last year, especially Kawhi. He was phenomenal in that Denver series, and he still looks like a guy who can lead a team deep into the playoffs if the supporting cast can hold up. What they need now is a long, healthy stretch where everybody is available. Just enough time to really build that on-court chemistry and put all the pieces together. If they can finally stay healthy and really lock in at the right time, I think the Clippers can absolutely crash the playoff picture. Now, in Tier 2, we have the worthy challengers. And here, I've got the Houston Rockets and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Minnesota has now made the conference finals in the last 2 years, and even though losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker is tough, they do have some young role players who can fill that rotation that they have confidence in, with Terrence Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark, and Rob Dillingham. The Timberwolves front office believes that these three young guys can somewhat make up for what Nickeil Alexander-Walker gave them with his ball handling, shooting, and defense. So even though losing Noah was a big deal, it actually might end up being a blessing in disguise if one of these three guys can break out next season. Coming into free agency though, I honestly thought it was going to be borderline impossible to retain both Randall and Naz Reid, but somehow they were able to keep both of them, which is definitely a huge bonus also. I'd expect to see the starting five look the same as last year, although there is a chance that we see a Rudy Gobert deal before opening night. It's been no secret how, although he is the backbone to their defensive structure, that he's also their biggest weakness, especially when it comes to the offensive side of the ball and with teams targeting him on the perimeter. And I'm not just saying this because Minnesota actually offered him up in a deal for Kevin Durant that was rejected. So it isn't like he's completely untouchable or something. But to close out last season, similar to what happened with the Clippers, they really found their footing on the offensive end after being shocking to start the season. And I do have a lot of faith in these young three guys to be able to come in and plug the holes, maybe making this team even better than they were last season. Anthony Edwards just continues to get better with every season that goes by, as he turned himself into one of the best three-point shooters in the league last year, which was such a major development, and it completely opened up his game, making him even harder to shut down. But over this offseason, I think he can improve in one major area, and that would be his playmaking. If he can really level up his passing ability, that is what's going to truly crack Minnesota's offensive game wide open. Now we've got the Houston Rockets, and for great reason. This was a team that was already great last season, and now they've gone all in. I mentioned earlier how the Clippers had one of the more honorable first-round exits you're ever going to see, but Houston honestly deserves that same kind of respect. They fully went toe-to-toe with a Golden State team that appeared to be on a mission. And if Curry hadn't have gone down, I believe the Warriors would have been good enough to make the conference finals. Houston pushed that squad to 7. They did not back down. They just didn't quite have enough in the department of shot creation when it mattered the most. But that might not be a problem anymore, because they've just added Kevin Durant, arguably the greatest tough shot maker the league has ever seen. There's no defensive scheme, no situation, no type of coverage that can fully take Durant out of a game. He's simply unguardable, and that changes everything for Houston. That kind of an elite scoring threat immediately raises their ceiling and gives them a guy who can bail them out when their plays break down, something they were clearly missing last postseason. Along with that, stealing Dorian Finney-Smith away from the Lakers was also a massive win. He's one of the more dependable 3-and-D players in this league and fits in perfectly with the identity that this team has built. They also upgraded their big man depth by replacing Jock Landale with Clint Capella, which is also a massive step forward for their bench unit. Now you're looking at a second unit that could include Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, Dorian Finney-Smith, Capella, and maybe even Steven Adams, depending on whether or not he starts or comes off the bench. That's potentially one of the deepest and most balanced benches in the whole league. I'd also expect to see some minutes from last year's third overall pick, Reed Shepherd, who could slide into that backup point guard role pretty nicely. And then when you talk about Houston, you can't not mention Amen Thompson, who's already becoming one of my favorite players to watch in the whole league. The stuff this guy can do athletically, especially on the defensive side of the ball, is just absurd. He's got the speed, instincts, and positional versatility, and if he can even make a small leap as a shooter this season, man, this team is going to be downright terrifying. Then of course, there's the all-star Alperen Sengun, who held his own in the playoffs last year against one of the toughest defenses in basketball. Then you've also got Fred VanVleet, who's one of the smartest, steadiest point guards in the game. He's the kind of guy that's going to keep this offense organized and make sure the ball gets to where it needs to go. Defensively, I think Houston is going to be a complete and utter juggernaut. They've got length, speed, switchability, and rim protection. But it's going to be the offensive side where they need to experiment and figure out exactly which lineups can consistently generate buckets. Do they go double big with Adams and Sengun? Do they slide KD to the 4 instead? Or do we even see some small ball looks with Durant at the 5 and a heap of shooters around him? There's a lot of different ways this could go, and that uncertainty is part of what keeps them in this second tier instead of in the legitimate title contenders group. The talent is clearly there. The defensive foundation is in place. The star power is now there as well. But until we see exactly how all of these pieces come together, especially on the offensive end, Houston remains a challenger, but not quite a championship favorite just yet. And finally, we reach the top tier, the legitimate championship contenders. And here, we've got the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets. Let's start with Denver, because what they just pulled off this offseason has quietly positioned themselves to be even scarier than people might think. This is a team that took the Oklahoma City Thunder to 7 games last playoffs, despite not actually being all that good, at least to their own lofty standards. But now they've gone out and added real, reliable depth to fix some of the exact issues that held them back. They moved on from the inconsistency of Michael Porter Jr. and swapped him for Cam Johnson, made a trade for Jonas Valanciunas, signed Tim Hardaway Jr. to a veteran minimum, and somehow also managed to bring back fan favorite on their championship team, Bruce Brown, to a minimum as well. It honestly feels like Denver was able to tick every single box in their wish list coming into the offseason. Now yes, the Valanciunas situation is still hanging in the balance. There's been talk that he might leave the NBA altogether and go and play in Greece instead, which would definitely complicate things for Denver. But even if they do lose him, I think this Nuggets team absolutely belongs in this top tier. Because let's not forget, they've got Nikola Jokic, arguably the best player in the world. And if you go back to something like Game 78 of the regular season and questioned then head coach Michael Malone what he'd want to fix before the playoffs, he probably would have given you a pretty simple list. A proper backup center to hold things down during the non-Jokic minutes, which is Jonas Valanciunas, a more consistent defensively engaged replacement of Michael Porter Jr., Cam Johnson, a real veteran shooter off the bench, someone like a Tim Hardaway Jr., and some more championship identity. How about Bruce Brown, a guy who can bring back some of that grit? And just like that, it feels like all of the holes have been patched. Cam Johnson, while not the most durable player in the world, is in my opinion just a flat out better version of MPJ in so many different ways. He's more consistent, a smarter playmaker, way better on the defensive end, and he offers more versatility with the ball in his hands. He's got the athleticism and the quickness to be really dangerous in transition, and in an offense like Denver's, where movement and spacing is everything, his ability to play off the ball is going to shine. I can already see him flying down the wing, catching a Jokic hit-ahead pass, and just racking up points off really easy looks, as that is just something MPJ never really brought to the table. And even a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr., who might not blow anybody away, is still going to have a major impact off the bench, because the wide open looks that Jokic is going to be able to generate is going to feel like target practice for him. Last season, the Nuggets were relying on guys like Julian Strawther to come in and deliver real playoff minutes. And that was just not sustainable. Now, they've got a real NBA vet who knows where to be and can still hit shots, even if he can be a bit streaky. Suddenly, the Nuggets have gone from a team with no bench to a team with an actual reliable depth chart. And if Valanciunas does decide to leave, they still have options. There are some more backup centers out there, but no question, that would complicate things a little. But with so many other gaps already filled, that hole becomes a lot less pressing, and something they could definitely manage without. Denver is going to be more balanced, more consistent, and flat out better on both ends of the floor. And that should be a terrifying thought for the rest of the league. And then we've got the Oklahoma City Thunder. And honestly, their position in this top tier almost doesn't even need explaining. They just had one of the most dominant regular seasons and playoffs we've ever seen. And yet, they managed to keep nearly their entire roster intact heading into next season. On top of that, they're going to get to see Nikola Topic, another high lottery pick who hasn't even stepped on an NBA court just yet. We don't have any idea on how good he's going to be, but given the track record of how well Oklahoma City drafts, he could also be a real piece for them. And if he's anything close to that, this team just got even better. For me, Oklahoma City will once again be the best team in the NBA next season, at least for the regular season. But right behind them, and I mean right behind them, are the Denver Nuggets. Maybe Denver doesn't finish as high in the standings, but when the playoffs begin, I think these two teams are going to be neck and neck in the West, with teams like Houston, Golden State, Minnesota, and the Clippers all breathing down their necks. However, there's one more team that I do believe has the chance to make a championship run as well in the West, and that's the Los Angeles Lakers, especially after the addition of DeAndre Ayton to fill out their starting five. And if you want to hear more about this move and exactly what it means for the Lakers' immediate future, then you can watch my full breakdown on that right now.